Hello everyone, welcome back to YK Reviews and happy Halloween. Today we're going to be doing a tier ranking for all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, so let's get straight into it here. Now before we start ranking these movies, if you are new to the channel, definitely consider subscribing. We've done a bunch of tier rankings for a lot of horror movies like Saw, Hellraiser, Halloween, Chucky, so definitely subscribe if you are new to the channel. And I've also done all the reviews for the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, so you can check out the playlist here. You can also go on the channel, check those reviews out. And don't forget to smash the like button if you do like those tier ranking videos. I want to know your thoughts as well in the comment section down below where you would rank these. Bear in mind too, this is just my thoughts, my opinions on these movies, so if you've got different opinions, if you agree with me, I want to know in the comment section down below. But let's show you the screen right here. So as you can see, we've got all 9 movies, so from the original one all the way up until the reboot, because we are counting it, and I had a lot to say when it comes to that reboot. You can again check out the review for that. And so we're just going to be ranking them in chronological order from the very first movie and then all the way up until the reboot. So starting off with the very first one, I mean, right off the bat, this one is just gonna go as an A. Easily a great entry into the franchise. You've got amazing characters, you've got Johnny Depp in there, you've got Heather Langenkamp, great cast members, and then of course the introduction to Freddy. And I'm going to say this right now, Robert Englund absolutely killed it as Freddy, from his humor, from his wit, from his gore, just everything about him when he was portraying Freddy Krueger was incredible. Even with the bad movies, and trust me, there are some bad movies, he was still just a standout in every single movie. And so with this one, you get the first introduction to him. You get so much iconic scenes when you've got Tina's death, you've got the claws coming out of the bathtub, you've got Johnny Depp's death with the blood spurting out of the bed. Most of this movie is just so memorable and still holds it up today. Like, I rewatched it for the reviews for this month, and it really does hold up in terms of the dialogue, in terms of like the cinematography, and in terms of the practical effects. Because like I mentioned it too, I prefer, when it comes to horror movies, going for the practical effects rather than the CGI looks, and with this, the practical effects really does hold up. Granted, in terms of like the ending, you can question the ending, a bit of hit and miss when it comes to like that final scene of like everybody coming out in broad daylight. Nancy's mum gets taken straight back into the house. Nancy and her friends are all alive in the car. Like, that kind of is left to the unknown. But in terms of like overall with the movie itself, it's so enjoyable and really does have some great suspense. Like, straight away from the off, you get the Freddy Krueger of like his backstory when it comes to like creating his claws. You get the suspense, you get the tension. It's just really an iconic, great slasher, and a very unique one in that, when you've got the slasher coming into the dreams. And I mentioned in the review, you've got the first introduction of Freddy's tongue, so that I just have to put it as an A for me. So for the next one we've got is Freddy 2, Freddy's Revenge, the sequel to the original movie. Now, while there are some memorable scenes in this, I feel like it's not as strong as the original movie. In terms of the follow-up, it's not one of the strongest in terms of the whole franchise. I do love the characters in this, like Jesse, for example. His scream is so iconic. Like, you can have a whole compilation of all of Jesse's scream. The ending, after watching the rest of the movies, I do enjoy this ending, because you've got the girl going after Jesse, she kisses Freddy, and that turns into Jesse. And while I wasn't a fan of having Freddy Krueger emulate Jesse as being the one that kills people and then eventually he does come to life, that I wasn't a huge fan of, but I do enjoy the storytelling of this. And again, Robert Englund's line delivery, Freddy Krueger's kills were really great. Of course, like Grady's death, for example, just mimicking a bit of like Tina's death inside the bedroom, Freddy Krueger's killing, but it was still a really enjoyable death sequence there. And that third act with Freddy crashing the party, absolutely incredible. So while this does have its flaws, it's still a very enjoyable watch. So when it comes to Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, this one is going to go as a C for me here. Now for the next one we've got is Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warriors. Honestly, this is my favorite movie of the whole franchise. It's absolutely iconic, so enjoyable. The third act, the dream sequences, I mentioned it in my reviews, like the balancing of real life versus dream sequence are really well handled in the first 3 movies. And with this one, with the introduction to the characters like Kincaid and Kristen, and you've got Nancy Thompson returning as well, there was some really memorable sequences. And the lines, again, like one of my favorite movies because of the humor with Kincaid and his lines, along with Freddy's lines, especially when he kills Jennifer, when he puts her head through the TV. Just like the line deliveries are so iconic. taking the piss out of the guy in the wheelchair, taking the piss out of like all these characters, all these kids who are having these dream sequences. A really great, memorable movie. And also, like I mentioned, that third act, while I wasn't a fan of Freddy killing off Nancy in the movie, it really just brought that element like nobody is safe. He ends up killing Nancy's dad, he ends up killing Nancy. The way they kill him off is by having it in two separate sequences, with the dream sequence and the real life scenario with like the doctor finding Freddy's corpse and everything. It was just a fun, enjoyable movie and a really strong, solid entry into the franchise. So when it comes to Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, this one for me, like I said, my favourite of the whole franchise, it's going as an A, just above Nightmare on Elm Street 1. Really solid entry, really great movie. Okay, now for the next one we've got here is we've got Part 4, Dream Masters. Now, this for me had one of the best lines in the whole franchise, with Freddy Krueger saying sayonara Rick's son and like the kill for that. That was really enjoyable, and while this one starts slowly dipping when it comes to the quality, it's still a really strong, solid entry in the movie. My only issue is that you kill off all the characters that you've been building up from the first movie. So you've got Kristen, you've got Joey, you've got Kincaid, all returning. Then they're killed off within the first 20 minutes of the movie to then focus on the new characters like Alice and Dan. And while the cast like Sheila and the one that was doing the workout and stuff like that, while they were great additions to the cast and great additions to the movie, it sort of just left me feeling a bit meh when it comes to like, you're killing off my favorite characters with Kincaid and with Joey and with Kristen all getting killed off in the movie, then focusing on the other characters. And while I did enjoy Alice and having her be the focal point, especially with what they do with her character, I just feel like they could have balanced the story and the subplots a little bit better. They had some amazing kills, like I mentioned, like Rick with the karate kills, like Kincaid's kill, Joey's kill was so brutal, and the lines again with that. And in terms of the third act too, I wasn't a fan of how they killed off Freddy with Alice holding a mirror showing the reflection of Freddy. Wasn't a huge fan of that. But I still had a good time with this movie. Definitely not one of the worst in the franchise. And the characters too were still enjoyable. Like, even though they killed off my favorite characters, the new characters they brought in were still pretty enjoyable and were okay to watch. So when it comes to Part 4, The Dream Masters, this one for me is going to go as a C. I still think that Part 2 is slightly better than Part 4, but it's still, like I said, a really enjoyable movie. Now for the next one we've got is going to be The Dream Child Part 5, with this one introducing Alice being pregnant in the movie. I wasn't a huge fan of that kind of direction, because then you've got her having these dream sequences with her future son Jacob. You've got this weird freak out moment of Freddy as like a baby being a demon child, basically a little troll. His resurrection, I think, was just a bit weak. How he was able to, like I mentioned it in the review, screaming himself to life. Just wasn't a great fan of that. And in terms of like the overall story of the movie with the new characters, like I mentioned, you killed off like the original characters, my favorite characters, but then the new characters, you got attached to it, you were enjoying their characters. With these ones, I wasn't a huge fan of the characters. Like, you've got Yvonne and Mark, I believe his name was. And so while all of this taking place, I just think like the storyline going with this one, having the dream child and all that stuff, wasn't really as capturing for me or entertaining for me as like the previous movies. Again, Freddy Krueger was still really entertaining in this movie and still enjoyable, but even in terms of the killing in itself, like the character Greta and how she died, Mark's death while Freddy was throwing some lines, was kind of a little bit underwhelming too. And then the whole third act as well, you have like Jacob, Alice's future child, battling out with Freddy, I thought was not as strong as an ending, but it was still enjoyable nonetheless. But out of the whole 5 movies, definitely the weakest in the whole franchise for me so far. So when it comes to Part 5, The Dream Child, this one is going to go as a D for me. Now, speaking of one of the worst in the franchise, up next we've got Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. And I mentioned it in my review, with this movie, you had a very enjoyable Freddy Krueger. Like, you could tell he was having a blast filming this movie, especially that scene when Spencer is in the video game and you've got him playing the video games. You can tell how much fun he's having. But the characters, I just felt like were very dull, very boring. The story itself, with John forgetting his memory, having amnesia, all that stuff, focusing on that plot, and then having the whole Krueger's child and all that kind of stuff, focusing on that. I just really was not enjoying this movie whatsoever, and even like the whole third act too. Now, I mentioned it in the reboot review, having this whole thing of bringing Freddy into the real world in order for him to be able to defeat it. While I enjoyed it with the first movie, felt like it was overplayed out at times with the rest of the movies. And with this one too, like the whole third act having Freddy taking on Maggie, and it just, that whole third act sequence too, just fighting over the glove and all that kind of stuff, and then just blowing him up. I really was completely underwhelmed with this movie, and it just one of the weakest in the whole franchise when it comes to the direction that they went with. So when it comes to Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, this one for me is going to be going as an E, just because Freddy's performance alone, and even having that Johnny Depp cameo, was really enjoyable to watch. There is worse in the franchise, which we'll definitely get to it here, but for the next one we've got is Wes Craven's New Nightmare, kind of like a meta take with horror movie. So this is always being compared to like the Scream movie, and with Wes Craven making both of these movies, I really had a fun time with this movie. I love the new aspect and the new take and the new twist that they took with this movie. My only criticism was I wish we got to see more of Freddy, because he was focused on in the third act, but he wasn't too focused in the first and second act. And while the movie in terms of the runtime was about an hour and 52 minutes, I wanted to see more of Freddy throughout that runtime, but you kind of felt it a little bit. However, overall, when it comes to, because you've got the return of Nancy as Heather Langenkamp, and you've got Robert Englund as Robert Englund, like these characters playing themselves, even getting a cameo from Wes Craven himself, I think it's definitely one of the big standouts. So when it comes to Wes Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street, this one for me is going to go as a B, because of the new twist it takes, because of the third act, which is still, like I said, Freddy's tongue returning, which we kind of missed it in the last couple of movies. I really had a fun time watching this movie, and I really enjoyed the new twist and the new take on it. And even Freddy's look too, he really looked more terrifying, more demonic. So I really enjoyed this movie. So yeah, going as a B for me. Okay, now for the next one we've got is Freddy vs Jason. I did the tier ranking for all the Friday the 13th movies, so you can check that out over here. I put this a lot lower than I'm going to put it in this one here, because when comparing it to the rest of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, this one really was an enjoyable watch. I mentioned it in my review, is that I wanted more focus on Freddy and Jason and their battle, because their battles were amazing to watch. You had the dream sequence, fight sequence, and then you had the third act with them going hand-to-hand combat, slashing and dicing and slicing one another. It really was an enjoyable watch. The only backdraw I would have to say with this is having the focus on the human characters and the human elements. Now, while they did move the story forward and they bring focus to the story, I felt like it was just a bit too much focusing on them rather than the horror icons and horror slashers. And again, I feel like this movie came out a little bit too late, but it's still a really fun watch for me. I really had a great time. So I watched it twice this month, for the Friday the 13th tier ranking and then for the Nightmare on Elm Street tier ranking. And I gotta say, I just had a blast watching it both times. So when it comes to Freddy vs Jason, this one is gonna have to go as a B for me. I really enjoyed this one. It really was a fun watch, and I wish they did another movie, like a sequel to this, because of how iconic that fight sequence was with the two of them. Okay, now for the final one we've got here is we've got Nightmare on Elm Street 2010, the reboot. I'm gonna say this now, I'm putting this as an F. I feel like this is definitely one of the worst in the franchise. It's the first time that Robert Englund is not returning to the franchise, not portraying Freddy Krueger. And with the direction that they went with here, in terms of like the look of Freddy Krueger, I really wasn't a fan of this one whatsoever, in terms of the direction and the story point with Freddy and his backstory, and then even like his line deliveries and his persona. It just felt like they went for more of like a creepy tone rather than like I mentioned it in my review, rather than like going for like the dickhead tone of like the jokes and the one-liners. It just really wasn't an enjoyable take when it comes to Freddy. Even like certain scene for scene when they're trying to like take on from the original one, like again, like the claws coming out the bathtub. When the original one, you had Freddy trying to drown Nancy. With this one, the claws come out of the bathtub and then just go back inside. There are some great deaths, for example like Chris's death, when similar to like how Tina died, how Freddy's killing her and she's like floating around all over the bedroom. I thought was really well handled and really well done, but it just wasn't enough to save this movie. And also that third act too, like I mentioned, having the whole thing of bringing Freddy to real life to kill him off, I just feel like has been overplayed at this point. So that whole third act battle sequence, that 2-on-1 handicap match, just felt slightly underwhelming too. So I definitely don't think it holds up. Like for example, the Friday the 13th reboot was surprisingly entertaining and enjoyable, and they did a lot of like unique twists and takes with it. So not doing a like for the original or the first two movies, this one, while again not going for like a like for like movie, it just still, if you're picking between the two, if you have to say watch A Nightmare on Elm Street, I'm gonna go for the original rather than the reboot, just because of the original really holds up. The practical effects, the Freddy Krueger portrayal, and the cast itself just really was more enjoyable than this one. So it's gonna have to go as a F for me here. But that about wraps it up for the tier ranking video here, for the tier list. Again, I want to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Where would you rank them? Would you agree with me? Do you completely disagree with me? I want to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. But that about wraps it up for the Halloween season, for the month of October. Again, I appreciate everybody's support. Appreciate everybody watching these videos, watching the retrospective reviews. Does mean a lot to me, though. I appreciate all that support. And again, if you are new to the channel, definitely consider subscribing so that you're not missing out on these types of videos. Got plenty of tier ranking videos coming your way, along with other videos as well. So you don't want to miss out on that. So subscribe to the channel for that. But I thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for listening. Again, happy Halloween. This is YK Reviews.